A stark white line of mineral crust traces the canyons of the Colorado River Basin. It is the nation's largest bathtub ring, and right now it is showing 16 stories of exposed rock. As of late June 2026, the surface of Lake Mead sits at 1,044.9 feet above sea level. This is not an abstract number. It is a proximity reading. A warning: the lake is just 4 feet above its all-time record low, set in the brutal summer of 2022. But that is the wrong metric. The number that matters, the number that dictates the future of power for millions of people, is 1,035 feet. 9 feet. If the lake drops another 9 feet, 12 of the 17 turbines inside Hoover Dam are not designed to operate. Hydropower generation will collapse by 70%. The US Bureau of Reclamation released a projection in May of 2026. It forecasts that Lake Mead will fall to 1,020 feet by July of 2027. A full 15 feet below the threshold for power generation failure. And the strangest part of this story is not that the water is disappearing. It is what one city did decades ago to prepare for this exact moment, and why that city will be the only one left with drinking water after the river stops flowing entirely. To understand what is happening to the American Southwest, you have to understand the original sin of the Colorado River. An error made with a fountain pen and flawed data more than a century ago. The year was 1922. The 7 states of the basin gathered to divide the river, a lifeline running 1,450 miles through an arid landscape. They signed the Colorado River Compact, a document that allocated 15 million acre-feet of water between the upper basin states of Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming, and the lower basin states of Arizona, California, and Nevada. Later, Mexico's share was added, bringing the total allocation to 16.4 million acre-feet per year. There was a problem, a foundational mathematical deception buried in the measurements. The hydrologists of the 1910s and early 1920s were measuring the river during one of the wettest periods in the last 500 years. They believed they were measuring an average. They were measuring a flood. Modern paleohydrology, reading the story of the river in ancient tree rings, shows that the true long-term average flow is closer to 12.4 million acre-feet. The river was overpromised by 4 million acre-feet a year from its very inception. For 100 years, the basin states have been writing checks that the river could never cash. The reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, were built as buffers, massive savings accounts to cover the deficit in dry years. But the mega drought that began in the year 2000 is not a dry spell. Scientists now call it long-term aridification. It is the climate of the region changing permanently, and the structural deficit that was once a manageable shortfall is now a catastrophic drain. The savings accounts are going bankrupt. This is the part the headlines do not capture. Nevada's legal share of the river is the smallest of all 7 states, just 300,000 acre-feet, a mere 1.8% of the total flow. Las Vegas, a city of neon and fantasy built in the driest desert in North America, pulls 90% of its water directly from Lake Mead. Its survival is tied to the reservoir in a way no other major city can claim. And one person saw this crisis coming 40 years before anyone else was willing to listen. Her name is Patricia Mulroy. In the early 1990s, as the general manager of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, she was known by many names. The Water Czar, the Water Witch. She looked at the math of the 1922 Compact and the explosive growth of Las Vegas and saw a collision course. While other cities were planning for growth, Mulroy was planning for collapse. She began a campaign that felt, at the time, like radical authoritarianism. She declared war on grass. She banned front yard lawns in new developments. She paid homeowners to tear out their existing turf. She launched what would become the most aggressive urban water conservation program in the world. From 2002 to 2025, even as the population of southern Nevada grew by 876,000 people, the region's total per capita water use from the Colorado River dropped by 58%. Inside the city, a hidden system was created, a circular economy of water. Today, 99% of all water used indoors in Las Vegas, from sinks, showers, and toilets, is captured, treated to exacting standards, and pumped directly back into Lake Mead. It is a system of near-perfect recycling. Las Vegas uses its tiny allocation of 300,000 acre-feet, then returns most of it, only consuming what is lost to evaporation or used outdoors on the shrinking acreage of grass. But Pat Mulroy knew conservation would not be enough. The bathtub ring was already appearing. The structural deficit was accelerating. The lake would continue to fall, and she became obsessed with one single terrifying number: 895 feet. Dead pull. The elevation at which the water level in Lake Mead drops below the lowest intake valve on Hoover Dam, the point at which gravity can no longer pull water downstream to California, to Arizona, to Mexico, the point at which the lower Colorado River physically ceases to exist. While every other water manager in the basin viewed dead pull as an unthinkable abstraction, Mulroy treated it as an engineering deadline. She initiated a project so ambitious, so expensive, that it was decried as fiscal insanity. A fail-safe for an apocalypse no one else believed would arrive. It was called Intake Number 3. Zoom out, and the engineering is breathtaking in its audacity. The first two water intakes for Las Vegas were built in 1971 and 2000, positioned high up the wall of the reservoir. By the early 2000s, Mulroy's projections showed they would both be left high and dry within decades. Intake number 3 would be different. It would be Las Vegas's cheat code for a dying lake. Construction began. A 3-mile-long, 20-foot diameter tunnel was bored underneath the lakebed itself. It was a massive, secret straw. The intake structure at the end of the tunnel was placed at an elevation of 860 feet, 35 feet below dead pull. It was connected to a new, adjacent, low-lake level pumping station, a $1 billion insurance policy with massive pumps capable of sucking water up from the stagnant bottom of the reservoir even after the dam had gone dry. The total cost was over $1.5 billion. It was a gamble on doomsday. And it means that today, as of 2026, Las Vegas is the only major metropolitan area in the entire Colorado River Basin that can continue to draw water even after the river itself has failed. California and Arizona will be cut off. The cities and farms that rely on the river's downstream flow will face an existential crisis. But in Las Vegas, the water will keep running. Pat Mulroy had secured the city's future by planning for the absolute worst-case scenario. Her critics called her a fearmonger. Now, they call her a prophet. Now, here is the part nobody is putting on the news. The architecture of laws that has governed the river for the last 2 decades is about to expire. The 2007 Colorado River Interim Guidelines. The 2019 Drought Contingency Plans. These were emergency patches designed to stave off collapse. Both agreements officially sunset on December 31st, 2026. Less than a year from now. The 7 states are currently locked in the most contentious negotiations in a century, trying to write the rules for how the river will be shared from 2027 to 2060. The talks are at a stalemate. The battle lines are drawn between the upper basin and the lower basin. The upper basin states, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico, argue that their legal obligation ends once they deliver their share of water past Lee Ferry, the dividing point in Arizona. They want cuts to be based on a percentage of available water, which would protect their interests in a drier future. The lower basin states, Nevada, Arizona, and California, are proposing cuts based on priority. Senior water rights, primarily held by California's agricultural districts, would be protected first. It is a fundamental disagreement over who should suffer most. The negotiations have become personal. In one corner, you have the Lower Basin Coalition, a fragile alliance led by Nevada Governor Joe Lombardo, Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs, and California Governor Gavin Newsom. Their chief negotiators, John Ensminger for Nevada and J.B. Hamby for California, are pushing for immediate, deep conservation to stabilize the reservoirs. On May 1, 2026, they submitted a joint proposal to the federal government, a plan to conserve an additional 3.2 million acre-feet of water through 2028, a massive voluntary cut meant as a bridge to a long-term deal. John Ensminger, Pat Mulroy's successor at the Southern Nevada Water Authority, called it a move from ideas to implementation. But the upper basin sees it as a stall tactic, a way for the lower basin to avoid confronting the reality that their overuse must end. Pat Mulroy herself, watching from the sidelines, has lamented the toxic gridlock. In late 2025, she observed that in past negotiations, there was always a sense of shared fate. Nobody's the enemy, she said. But now, it seems everyone is. The deadline of December 31st, 2026, hangs over every meeting. If the states cannot agree, the federal government, through the Bureau of Reclamation, will be forced to impose its own solution, a scenario that no state wants. The clock is ticking, not in years, but in months. And as the political drama unfolds, the physical reality in the reservoir grows more dire. The numbers from Hoover Dam are not projections, They are physics. The dam was completed in 1936, a monument to American ambition. For decades, it was a symbol of absolute control over nature. Now, it is a symbol of vulnerability. The power it generates is allocated across Nevada, Arizona, and California, serving millions of customers. Its capacity is directly tied to the pressure exerted by the lake behind it. More water means more pressure, or head, less water means less pressure. The current level of 1,044.9 feet is already a problem, but the drop to 1,035 feet represents a non-linear cliff. At that point, the water pressure is too low for a dozen of the dam's turbines to function efficiently, or at all. The grid loses 70% of its capacity, not overnight, but the risk of brownouts and blackouts across the southwest escalates dramatically, especially during summer heat waves. This is the scenario the Bureau of Reclamation's May 2026 forecast makes all but certain for the summer of 2027, with its projection of a 1,020-foot lake level. That forecast shattered a brief period of optimism. The winters of 2023 and 2024 had delivered above-average snowpack, giving the basin a temporary reprieve. But the spring of 2026 was a disaster. High temperatures and dry soil meant the melting snow evaporated or soaked into the ground before it could ever reach the river. Runoff was far below average. The lake, which had briefly stabilized, began to plummet again, falling faster than expected. The next threshold is 950 feet, minimum power pool. At this level, the pressure is too low to spin the turbines at all. Hoover Dam, the mighty engine of the Southwest, ceases to be a power plant. It becomes just a dam, a plug. And then there is the final number, 895 feet, dead pool. It is a common misconception that dead pool means the lake is empty. It is not. At 895 feet, there are still millions of acre-feet of water in the reservoir, but it is stranded water. The lake level has fallen below the lowest outlet on the dam. The river, as a downstream entity, is severed at its source. For California and Arizona, this is the apocalypse. The Central Arizona Project Canal, which brings Colorado River water to Phoenix and Tucson, goes dry. The All-American Canal, which irrigates the vast agricultural empire of California's Imperial Valley, goes dry, except for Las Vegas. Thanks to Pat Mulroy's foresight, the city's third straw will still be deep underwater, ready to pump. Las Vegas will have water. The rest of the lower basin will be staring at a dry riverbed. It is a scenario of regional triage that was once science fiction. The Bureau of Reclamation's own 24-month study now puts it on the table as a plausible future. Zoom out, further, away from the Colorado River, and the crisis is metastasizing across Nevada's other great water bodies. These are the forgotten victims. While the world watches the bathtub ring at Lake Mead, entire ecosystems are quietly blinking out of existence. Travel 400 miles north of Las Vegas to Mineral County, to a place called Walker Lake. It is a terminal desert lake, a rare perennial jewel fed by the Walker River. Or it was. For the last century, upstream agricultural diversions have siphoned off nearly all of the river's flow before it can reach the lake. Walker Lake is a remnant of the ancient, massive Lake Lahontan that once covered much of northern Nevada. Today, it has lost roughly 90% of its historic volume. Its surface elevation is at 3,916 feet, 24 feet below what is considered full. As the water volume has shrunk, the salinity has skyrocketed. The lake is now so salty that the native Lahontan cutthroat trout, a species that has survived here for millennia, can no longer reproduce. The vast flocks of common loons that once used the lake as a critical stop on their migratory path have dwindled. The ecosystem is in a state of cascading collapse. An organization called the Walker Basin Conservancy is now trying to buy back water rights from farmers to restore flow to the lake. It is a desperate, expensive attempt to reverse a century of decline, one farm at a time. The death of Walker Lake is a slow-motion tragedy, a warning of what happens when a closed basin water budget goes into permanent deficit. And it is not alone. Just to the west lies Pyramid Lake, another stunning remnant of Lake Lahontan, located entirely within the sovereign lands of the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe. The tribe has fought for generations to protect its sacred lake and the fish that live within it. But now they face a new threat, amplified by the same forces choking the Colorado. Lower water levels and searing summer temperatures. In the summer of 2026, NASA satellites began capturing images of the lake from space. They showed vast, swirling blooms of vivid green. It is cyanobacteria, harmful algal blooms exploding in the warmer, shallower water. These blooms can be toxic to fish, to wildlife, and to humans. They are a symptom of a system under stress, a sign that the lake's natural resilience is breaking down. The water crisis in Nevada is not just about a single river or a single city. It is a statewide unraveling. From the high-stakes politics of Lake Mead to the quiet death of Walker Lake and the algal blooms of Pyramid Lake, the same story is being told. There is not enough water. There never was. And the margin for error has disappeared. But in the face of this slow-motion collapse, a new kind of thinking is beginning to emerge. Ideas that would have been dismissed as fantasy a decade ago are now being signed into official agreements. In June of 2026, the water authorities of Nevada, Arizona, and California signed a historic Memorandum of Understanding. It is a framework for one of the most complex water trades ever conceived. It centers on a facility on the coast of Southern California, the Claude Bud Lewis Carlsbad Desalination Plant. The plant, located in San Diego County, pulls water from the Pacific Ocean and converts it into 50 million gallons of fresh drinking water every day. It is expensive, energy-intensive, and controversial, but it creates new water independent of the snowpack in the Rocky Mountains. The agreement opens the door for Nevada to help fund the expansion of this plant, or others like it. In return for its investment, Nevada would not receive a single drop of ocean water. That would be physically and economically impossible. Instead, it would be a paper trade. For every gallon of desalinated ocean water that a city like San Diego uses, it would leave a gallon of its Colorado River allocation in Lake Mead. That water, legally credited to Nevada, could then be drawn through Las Vegas's intakes. Nevada would be paying to turn ocean water into drinking water for California, in exchange for California's share of a dying river. It is a mind-bendingly complex solution, a financial and legal water transfer designed to bypass the laws of physics. It is also a sign of absolute desperation. States are now willing to trade desert water for ocean water, a testament to just how valuable every drop in Lake Mead has become. The crisis has even seeped into the abstract world of finance and gambling in the most literal way possible. As of 2026, online prediction markets like the regulated exchange Kalshi are offering contracts on the water level of Lake Mead. Gamblers and speculators can now place actual bets on what the lake's official elevation will be on a given date. Will it fall below 1,042 feet by the end of August? Will it hit a new record low this year? It is a grim new form of speculation. People are betting real money on the demise of the West's most critical reservoir. The bathtub ring has become a ticker symbol. The slow-motion disaster has been gamified, turned into a daily commodity to be traded alongside stocks and cryptocurrency. It is perhaps the ultimate sign of our strange, disconnected times that one can now profit from correctly predicting the speed of an ecological collapse. The data from the Bureau of Reclamation has become a tool for day traders. And then there is the existential question buried in the data, the politics, and the engineering. The question that haunts the entire basin. Is Las Vegas's survival strategy the third straw, the water recycling, the desalination deals, a model for the future, or is it the ultimate act of regional selfishness? On one hand, it represents a city that took the crisis seriously while others ignored it. A city that invested billions to secure its future against the inevitable. It is a triumph of engineering and long-range planning, but on the other hand, it creates a moral hazard. By ensuring its own survival, Las Vegas has, in a way, insulated itself from the shared fate of the basin. When Deadpool arrives, Phoenix and Los Angeles will be in a state of emergency. Las Vegas will not. Does this reduce Nevada's incentive to make the painful concessions necessary for a basin-wide solution? If you have the only lifeboat, are you more or less likely to help the other passengers? It is a question with no easy answer, and it hangs over the deadlocked negotiations. John Ensminger is fighting for Nevada's interests, but his secure position, thanks to the foresight of Pat Mulroy, gives him leverage that other negotiators can only dream of. For now, the river continues its decline. The snowmelt from the Rockies that began its journey in the spring is making its way down through Lake Powell, where it will be captured behind Glen Canyon Dam. The Bureau of Reclamation will release just enough to meet the legal obligations downstream, and not a drop more. The delta between the water entering the system and the water being used by the 7 states and Mexico remains a vast, unbridgeable gap. Every single day the deficit grows. The evaporation under the relentless desert sun pulls millions of gallons into the sky. The farms of the Imperial Valley, which hold some of the oldest and strongest water rights on the entire river, continue to draw their share to grow alfalfa destined for cattle feed overseas. The system is locked into a pattern of self-destruction, codified by a 100-year-old legal framework that no one can agree on how to dismantle. So, 3 questions hang over the basin tonight. 1. Can the 7 states, in the few months they have left, break a century of precedent and agree on a new law of the river before the December 31st, 2026 deadline? Or will the federal government be forced to intervene, triggering a legal war that could last for decades? 2. What happens to the power grid, the economy, and the cities of the Southwest in the summer of 2027, when Lake Mead, as officially projected, falls below the 1.035-foot threshold and the lights begin to flicker? And 3. Is Las Vegas's $1.5 billion straw to the bottom of the lake a blueprint for survival in the arid 21st century? Or is it the ultimate tragedy of the commons, allowing one city to drink deep from a dying river while its neighbours watch it run dry? The water that sits in Lake Mead tonight is already spoken for. It is promised to cities, to farms, to sovereign tribal nations, and to another country. It is promised by laws written on paper that bear no resemblance to the physical reality of the river. Somewhere in the brittle pages of the 1922 Compact, 4 million acre-feet of water that do not exist are still being allocated. That phantom water, that century-old deficit, is what is draining Lake Mead. It is an absence, moving invisibly through the system, from the headwaters in Wyoming to the dry delta in Mexico. The negotiations are still stalling, the third straw is still waiting, and somewhere deep in the dark, cold water at the bottom of the lake, the future of the American Southwest is waiting to be pumped to the surface.